Someone asked me if I'm going to be funny today. I'm not going to be funny today. Today this is going to be a professional, highly technical talk. I will try not to smile. Are you okay? I smile. All right. Yeah. I'm so happy to be here again. Like Alex said, I was here last year. I just found myself on YouTube, and if you look very closely, you will notice that I'm wearing the same clothes. I'm not joking. Those are I have only one pair of decent jeans and a shirt to talk with. So this is me from last year, and today I'm going to talk about Redux. Because Redux is framework agnostic, you can take this information to any framework you choose. Short introduction, very, very short. Let's start with me. I was born in 1981. Not far from here, this is me. Right here, right there, somewhere, all right? My mother used to arrange meetups. They didn't have any diversity issues, you see. All of them are women's. But you know, history is hard, and in 2006, something awful happened. We changed my life. You all know about this, yeah? What happened in 2006, you know? No. Vista was released. So we all need to buy MacBooks and pay tons of money for adapters and all for life. But now I'm good. I've got a great title. I've got my photo in color and some titles. Yeah. So let's get started. I'm also proud to be a part of the community where I live and work in New York. So if you're visiting, come and check it out. We've got great meetups. And just before we deep dive into Redux, let's take a second because we are having fun, but not everything perfect in our world. So I'd like to share with you that I'm also volunteering for AMOU, which stands for Anonymous Microsoft Office Users. So if you or one of your friends still use Microsoft Office, please meet me after the talk. I will hug you. All right. Let's start the talk. Let's waste the time until I've got only 10 minutes. All right? Redux, who used Redux? Yeah. 1997, when we still used CD-ROMs, this book was published, Object-Oriented Software Construction, and this term was, I think this was the first time that we heard about this pattern. Who heard about CQS, Command Query Separation? All right, a very old pattern. Basically, it means that every method should be either a command or a query. In other words, if we're asking a question, we are not changing the answer. We want to separate between methods that change the state and queries that return the results. All right? So if we take this diagram from 20 years ago, I think, and we just change the names, we've got Redux. So separate methods that change the state from those who query the state. This is not a new idea. And Redux just implement this. This great book, 15 years ago, Enterprise Integration Patterns, if you read it, you find, what? I'm okay? You just look worried. Want me to? Look. This is my good side. If you read this book, you find 65 messaging patterns. It will really help you to really understand Redux and basically design your app, your modern 2018 app. All right, let's finish by this picture. Who knows this person? No one? Me either. It's just a random picture of someone who looks important. Let's talk about Redux. Always put a picture of someone who looks important in your slide. It's just... Redux is a front-end-oriented lean implementation of a messaging system. Don't treat Redux just as a library. That's the message from this talk, all right? So we're all familiar who use Redux familiar with this flow. We've got UI, action creators, action, middleware, all right? Unidirectional flow. Something interesting here, the only part in this pattern that accept an action and return an action is the middleware, all right? It's very important. So Redux is all about action processing. We care about getting an action and dispatching an action back. And the most interesting part of Redux is the middleware. The rest of the system is just plain functions and plain objects. When you work with Redux, you need to change your mind. You need to understand that you are programming with actions. And once we understand it, it's become much easier to implement very complicated data flows. If we're programming with actions, we like to categorize our actions basically into 3 different categories. We've got command actions, event actions, and document actions. Command is an action that asks for something. It's just the initial action that will start a process. An event action, just an event. Something happened in our system. Maybe we like to know about it. Maybe some other parts of our system want to react to this event. And a document action, it's an action, an event that has the final structure of the data, and this is the only event in Redux that the reducer processes. So if you look at this basic flow, we want to fetch a collection of books, and then we want to set our loader to true. We want to show a spinner, and then start an API request. It can be successful. We want to set the books in our state, shut down the loader, all right? If I take this diagram and use this way of thinking and categorize my action, I think it's become more clearer. I've got 2 command actions, fetch books and API request, 2 events, and 5 different document actions. Why do I care about it? Because right now, just by looking at this diagram, I can implement most of my app. Do you agree? I can create all of my actions, I'm aware. I can create all of my action creators right now. I can implement all the reducers. So I can define my action types, I can create my action creators, I can implement the reducers just by thinking and dividing my actions into different types. The hard part in Redux is how do I get from this initial action, this command action, in our example, get books, how do I get to the final action with the collection of books that the reducer can put on the state? All right? Make sense? Someone? Are you alive? Did you eat this strange green thing at lunch? No, all right. Some of you ate this. Some more people are missing here. All right. So let's take a look at some code, all right? So this is a very basic Redux app. Let me just check out a branch. Checkout, yeah, force checkout. You are not threatening me. So if I'm implementing this scenario that I just show you, let's take a look at this action creator for fetching books. Everyone can see the code? So I like to create, I'm always creating a prefix for my action because I want my logger to make sense. That's the whole point of using React. I'm creating constants for my action names, and I'm going to use this prefix, and we're going to use it in other places as well. And my action creators will always look like this. Basics of Redux, I'm sure that most of you are familiar with this. If you're doing something more than just returning an action in Redux, you're just making things more complicated than they really should. Who's using Redux Thunk? Don't. You don't need to. All right. Let's take a look at my API actions. Now, this is a great pattern. I think this is very opinionated, but I'll show you why in a minute and let me know what you think. The API action types are pretty. Why can't I see? Oh, all right, you can see it well. It's the TV. The API action types, I don't use any prefix because it's an API request. I can use it in other context, but when I'm creating my action, I'm delivering a prefix, an entity name. So I know to make a connection between a generic API request to a certain entity. All right? My UI action, just set the loader. I can hardcode the prefix. I don't need to reuse it. It will always be a UI. And my notification actions, again, simple action creator. I can also implement the reducers. I don't need to implement reducer for API actions because this is a command action, API request, and API success and API error are just events. I don't care about it. In the books actions, I care only about the set books. Notification action, I care about only the set notification. All right? So if I jump to my reducers, I keep them very, very simple and clean. And I can implement them without even know how I'm going to get there. Who's going to dispatch the set books? All right? Did you ever, all of you that use Redux, did you ever had a situation where a single reducer had a switch case for 2 different actions? You know what? No one? You're doing great. Cool. Like, I care about set books, and I'm always, and also about, I don't know, API end or API success, like 2 different actions in one reducer, because you want to change different places in your state. All right. So I implemented my reducers, everything fine. Let's move forward. Let's talk about how do I get from this initial action to my document action. And this is where the middleware kicks in. We need to process our action. We're getting initial actions. Finally, we want to dispatch the document action, and we can reprocess action if we need. For this, we've got well-defined design patterns. Because we're programming with actions, we've got a bunch of ideas. Some of them are very simple and straightforward, and you probably use them without even knows. Other just can help you think about your flow. Like, I want to filter actions. I want to map one action to another. I want to split one action into 2 other actions, and so on. All right? I split my middlewares into 2 categories. I've got my core middlewares. Middlewares that process generic application level actions, like API request is a generic application core action. I can use it in different contexts, but I'm also creating middleware specifically for an entity. For example, the books middleware is coupled to my fetching books collection business logic. So if I want to implement this, and now I've got this diagram, and I've got those terms, and I can identify my action, it's much easier for me to build my middleware. The first middleware I want to build is the books middleware, because I want to catch the fetch books, and I want to split, filter and split. The next middleware is the application level middleware, the API middleware. I want to catch, filter the initial action, the API request, and then dispatch 2 events, API success, API error, maybe API on progress. Back to my books. I want to catch API success that related to books and split it into 2 document action, and then send them to 2 different reducers. The set loader to the UI reducer, the set books for the books reducer. That's how I keep my reducers clean and separated. All right, sounds good? And I use the entity, this entity attribute, to keep the context. Let's try to see it in action. So, let's try to do some live coding. And for this, who using Visual Studio Code? Great. I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code, and then quit it and continue with a real ID. And this is considered to be actually a best practice. All right? All right. So how this middleware looks like. If I go back to my app, I want to create, let's do it full screen. I want to create my books middleware. Create a new file. Let's call it just books. And my middleware will look something like this. Books middleware. The first line is always next action. So the first thing I'm doing is keeping my logger on the right, in the right order. Then action type, switch action type. And let's do this. I want to split the fetch books. The iPad is dead. I want to split the get books, the fetch books, the initial action into two other actions. So it's going to look like this. In case of fetch books, what I want to do is to dispatch a new. You caught me, I'm doing Angular. Now it's just function. A new API request. I need to pass the body. I don't have anybody. A method. Let's do a get. URL. I've got a constant that holds the URL, so books, and the entity name, which is books. I'm also want to do this. Dispatch set loader to true. Let's break it. All right? Next. In case of API success, I want to catch API success that related to books. So I'm going to do this, API success. In case of books API success, I can set the loader to false, and I can dispatch a set books event, because now I've got the results from the action payload. Action payload. And so on and so on. Because what you're seeing right now, this pattern, this is the only middleware that actually coupled to an entity. This is the glue. My API request middleware knows nothing about nothing, and I can reuse it. And this is very similar to how we define routes. Because when we are working with Redux, we are programming with actions. And when we're programming with actions, we need to think about action in, action out. All right? Let's implement. I'm going to take this books middleware. I'm going to throw it right here. Huh? Visual Studio Code just opened, you see? I didn't do nothing. I've got some kind of an error, but we'll take care of it. API is not defined in books.js. Let's take it second. API, yeah, of course. What is an API? I don't know. I can't just invent stuff. So I'm going to import from my constant. And now it's supposed to work. So when I press this button, now you can see my initial action, fetch, it doesn't do nothing to the stage. It's just for me, for debugging, to understand what's going on. And then an API request with some metadata, what to perform, which method, URL, entity, and the set loader. Set loader, set to true. All right? Make sense? Great. Next. Now I want to implement a core middleware, a middleware that I'm going to reuse, the API middleware. Just one middleware that will take care of all of my API actions. So let's try to do a middleware for this. API middleware. And in case of API middleware, I only care about one action. So I can say if action types equals to API request. Then I'm going to fetch. Let's take the entity name, the method, and what else? Entity, method, and I don't remember what I put on my action, payload, metadata. Oh, the URL, yeah. The most important part. I'm going to fetch from this URL using this method. Because it's a plain fetch, it returns a promise. I can catch the response, return a JSON, and then catch. Here I've got the data, so I can call API success, and I need to pass the data and the entity name. In case of an error, I want to dispatch API error, and again, the same pattern, the error, and the entity name. So if you take a closer look on this code, it's actually very generic, very simple, very focused. It doesn't aware of no entity at all. It just used the entity that I passed to him from the action payload to keep the integrity of my actions. And this middleware will handle all of my API calls. So I'm going to add it to my core API array, API middleware. Hopefully there wasn't no mistakes, and try to dispatch. There was a mistake because I can see I stuck here. Can you spot a problem? Yeah, I didn't use dispatch here. Dispatch, and let's put it. Let's give it a try. I'm dispatching. I still have an issue. Maybe it's just what happened? Dispatch, API success, action middleware. No. What? I just did. Core middleware, API middleware. All right. Well, you see it works. I'm not going to waste time because of a typo or something. All right. This is how my API middleware looks like. Now, every time you want to perform an API request, just send an API action. Make sense? So actually, just by looking at this books router, action router, and this generic API core middleware, we can understand the pattern. It's just like playing ball. You're catching an action, and you're throwing an action. And to be successful with Redux, the way I see it, is to understand this concept and keep your Redux component very small and focused. So each reducer care only about document action. The API middleware and the rest of my core API middleware care about specific actions, and I'm not coupling nothing. The only middleware that knows about a specific flow is my books middleware. All right. Let me switch. All right. So this is the complete flow. Always the complete flow. There is an error, which is good. I've got a fetch request related to books, then an API request, a set loader, which changed the state, an API error event, create notification related to books, set notification, only document action, change the actual state, set loader because I want to shut down the loader, and after a few seconds I'm removing the notification. Maybe when I build a UI for this, it will be like a toast message. So just by reading the logs, I can understand everything in my Redux app. And I've seen a lot of Redux-based app. Then when you open the logger, you just see random names. You don't even know which action was the initial action, which entity related to that. Maybe you need to deep dive and dig inside your action metadata. The way I see it, this is Redux, this is the pattern, this is working with action. I want to understand how it works just by watching the logs. And of course, I can do all this time traveling. So don't be afraid to dispatch event like API error that doesn't change the state, but enable other parts to react to this event. This is your extension point. All right? Let's go back to the slide. So, in this point of time, we looked at the filter, map, and split, which are the most common patterns when you're building your middlewares. And we used the integrity key pattern, which is to pass the entity and keep everything in context. Now we can add more and more middlewares to our app. Part of them will be core. Part of them will be very specific, like the multi-middleware, which accept an array of actions and then dispatch them one by one. A logger middleware, if we like. This is the most famous middlewares in React. And we can implement some transformation patterns, like the enrich and normalize. All of those patterns are related only to middlewares, because the rest of the component in Redux are simple code which deals only with simple functions and simple objects. I want to show you the full flow now. So back to my app. I've got some core middlewares. The API middleware, we've seen it. Accept API request and the action that goes out, API success or API error. My normalize middleware do something very tricky. If there is a set event, now I'm using action type includes because I don't care which entity is related to. I care about events that start with set because those events are document events. Those events contain the data that the reducer is going to take and put on my state. So I'm catching all my document action. I'm checking if on the action payload metadata I've got some indication that this data need to be normalized. If so, I'm taking the data structure and right here I'm converting an array to an object. So this middleware normalized the data. And there is a name for this. This is a transform pattern. Took one action and produced another. I'm also firing an event. I'm notifying my app that the data was normalized. If we go back to the logger and dispatch this action, we just need to get rid of this error. Let's go to my constants, URLs, back here, and I'm dispatching. You can see right here, API success, normalize data, and then save the data. All right? The enrich action, it means that when I'm dispatching the set notification action from my books middleware, I don't want to care about how this notification created and how it's going to be removed. So I created this generic middleware, the notification middleware, and here I'm catching the create notification, and I'm enriching the data. What happened? That's it. When the time over, you want to kick me off the stage? I've got 2 more minutes just for this. All right. I'm catching the create notification, and I'm adding some data. I'm enrich the action payload. So I'm adding an ID. I'm basically creating an object, and then set timeout. And after a few seconds, I'm removing the notification. But the books middleware doesn't know nothing about it. It's just fire create notification. And another part of the system will deal with it. Because to success with Redux, we need to understand that we are programming with actions. So action in, action out, and the rest are simple functions that know how to catch a specific action, what to do with it, and which action needs to be dispatched in response. All right. Back to our slides. So right now, I've got an action, I've got an array of application middlewares, and then array of core middlewares. So my initial actions get processed until the final document action dispatch, and the reducers take care of it. Let's summarize. Redux is a front-end-oriented lean implementation of a full-blown messaging system, patterns that we took from the server side. Why? Because single-page front-end applications become complicated. We want to learn how to do complicated stuff. We can look of what we did for 20 years on the server side. Makes sense. Learn about those design patterns. Understand that Redux is much more than just a library. That worked for me. And you'll be able to think about and use well-known design patterns of working with events and use terms to describe the flow that eventually will help you use Redux in a very simple way. Because Redux doesn't have to be complicated. You can take this demo, I'll share the code with you, and you will see that it's actually a very complex infrastructure to build a very complex data flow, and I'm not using any of those fancy Redux thunk, or observables, or whatever, just plain code. All right? You can use those supports in the library. I use them sometimes when I need. They just help you to implement those patterns. I highly recommend you to check out this book. It's old. It's got the most ugly cover, but it helps you understand the pattern. If you liked my opinion, you can check out my book. It's not ready yet, but you can put your email, and I will send you a free copy once it's ready. And all those stuff and those ideas will be there. If you like, you can check my other books, like VS Code, Why Are You Doing It to Yourself? Or How to Live with PHP, if you're interested. Anyway, I want to thank you very much. If you've got any other questions, I'll be outside near the coffee machine. I think, yeah, we don't have time.
Thank you.
Thank you.